to start, yeah.
Yes, I think the recording has started, so please start.
Okay, great. Yeah, so, okay, so I guess I should say good morning, everyone, yeah. Oh, good evening, yeah. So I'm Xusheng Xiao, yeah. So now I'm an assistant professor at Case Western Reserve University, yeah. So I was Dr. Xiao's PhD students back in NC State, and I was in Illinois, I think in 2013 and 2014. Yeah, I was there for 1 year. Yeah, at the time I lived with Wei. Yeah. Okay, so as you may know, I've been the assistant professor for roughly 4 years. Yeah, about to be 4 years. Yeah, this is my 8th semester. Yeah. So I'm honored today to share some of my experiences and advice for your PhD study, and also later when you become a faculty, if you choose the academy route, right? So these are, I think I'm not going, I think you can Google online, you can find many other professors' experience. So I'm not going to repeat all those. And I think Dr. Xie has a large collection of advices as well, right? So I'm just going to talk about some of my own experiences, and I think this kind of things would be more effective if we engage in discussions intensively for each of my slides. So I don't have so many slides, and I intend to leave much of my time for Q&A and discussions, okay? So first, I'm going to briefly talk about my PhD journey with PhD journey. Yeah, so I joined NC State back in 2009. So I graduated with my bachelor in 2007. I worked in industry for 2 years. Yeah, so so at the beginning, I mean, as other PhD students in my first semester, I would say it's very difficult. Yeah, so or first year, right? So you need to take courses, and you need to balance your time between courses and research, right? So and luckily on my second year, I got my first ICSI, but that law actually was pretty tough. I still remember that the first time I wrote my first paper with Dr. Xie, at that time I really didn't know how to write a paper. So I still remember my first submissions with the paper. Even though the page limitation is 10 pages, I write my introduction to span into the fourth page. Yeah, so my introduction already take up 3.5 pages. Yeah. So you can imagine when the reviewer look at my first submission, right? What kind of feedback they will give me, right? One of the reviewer directly say, "How come you write an introduction that ends at the fourth page, right? And then how much more you can write for the rest of your approach, unless you do think your approach is very thin, and a lot of things just like discussion." So you can imagine that kind of things, right? So that's why the first time trial definitely was some failure, and luckily I tried earlier, and then I remember like I went to IBM Research to do my first summer internship, and when I went back and I revised the paper. Basically, I think at that time I worked with Dr. Xie to completely rewrite the paper, 10 pages, and luckily got into the ICSI, and that was my first ICSI paper, and my first time to know, okay, this is the feeling of publishing a paper with the work that I did, right? But of course, this is the first words. Even though you publish your first paper, I still didn't get too much sense on like really how to drive a research project, or how to, I mean, organize those tasks into a subtask, and then later I can quickly manage the time and then write it down, right? So after this first paper, I think I went into another round of struggling, right? But this time of struggling is like, because after I did internship in IBM Research, I learned some new technique, and I have some new ideas working with my mentors at that time, and I try to apply into the software engineering domain, although I learned how to use NLP technique to perform some analysis on the use cases, right? So, but that actually gave me some kind of challenges, because my first paper was about testing, and now I'm trying to publish a paper that uses text analysis technique. At that time, with my limited scope of knowledge, I really don't know how to make a good story out of it. So that paper was rejected so many times. I remember the first time I submitted to FSE, I got strongly rejected. Right, so one of the reviewers saying that, okay, this is completely out of scope of the software engineering research, blah blah, right? And it was very harsh, right? So then I remember I resubmitted to another round of SE conferences, and then I even submitted to EXAC, right? And it all got rejected. So I was quite struggling at that time. I think at that time, one lucky thing that doctor suggested me, like, split the project into two parts, and the other part was to collaborate with one of the Indian students at that time in our group. In the end, we submit the paper again in the next year's FSC. So first time I got strongly rejected, and then I submit the paper again in next year's FSC. So we can see I spent 1 more year to revise the whole paper, adding lots of experiments and rewrite the whole paper. And luckily at that time, the other part of the ICSI also got accepted. And then my first FSC paper also got accepted. And I think after that, I start to get a feeling on how to pursue a research topic and how to really organize your thoughts, and then lay out your implementation plan, your evaluation plan, and how you can organize those things and then write it down, and then doing this kind of thing. So and I was fortunate that after that paper got in, the other paper that was rejected earlier also got in. So I at that year I got also ASE and ESTAR, and I also put my text analysis technique that I use in my FSE paper to the Unix security paper that collaborated with another security professor, Professor William Unk in NC State, and it was in the first time we submitted to Unix security. That was also my first Unix security paper. Yeah, so I think through the after this round of paper publications, now I really understand. Okay, so when you look at the problems, what's the key things that you need to know, and then how you can really write it down, and how you can revise it, and then how we can resubmit it and make sure it can be published, and this kind of thing, and people can appreciate your research and what kind of things you should put down in the paper and what kind of things you shouldn't, right? So that was like, at least after 3 first author paper, I started to have this kind of feeling. But as you can see, that was all already the 4th year of my PhD, and I have to say and then going to my 5th year is like my last chunk of the paper that I had to submit, and then spend the 1 semester to look for job. I think Win is doing a similar thing right now, right? So, and along this way, at that when I was doing my PhD, one different things I did is like I went to research lab every year. I think Win also did the same thing, right? I think that also give me some special training, like that you couldn't get in the university. So when you work with different people, not necessarily they are very research oriented, right? But they can give you different kinds of inspirations, and also teach you different kinds of new skills. For example, like in IBM, I learned about text analysis technique, and then when I work with Nicola in Microsoft research, I learned more about like static analysis, this kind of thing. And because at the time I also work with different things, but sometimes when you work in the research lab is a little bit different situation. Like before I went there, I was expecting like maybe you are working on a research project and in the end you could publish, but that was not always the case, right? Sometimes your mentor may not have the projects that are research oriented, and whether you would like to push for publication or not is completely driven by you, right? So, for example, when I work with Nicola in Microsoft Research, he basically just had the projects that is implementation oriented. So, and he has very high standard in terms of coding, and he did code a review on every of my code checking. So that actually made me like have to stay in the Microsoft like until like almost 10 p.m. every night, right? I have to stay there, finish all the stuff, and then went through his code review, and then I can check in. Right? So, and the good thing there is like in the end of my internship, I did deliver something that's runnable, right? And he can deploy into the cloud. And later we actually did a studies on the a tool, right? But the problem there is that you didn't actually have any time to think of any research idea and the other things, right? But I leveraged that kind of, I leveraged the platform there and try to talk to other researchers, and I get inspired by other researchers. And in the end, we still will be able to manage to publish the ASE paper. And later, when I went back to Microsoft Research again, I collaborated with Nikolai again, and that time he spent some time to did the study, and we extend our ASE paper to a journal. So I think that's also a good thing that I learned in the InTouch lab. But again, like not necessarily every project was research oriented, and you also will take up a chunk of your time in your PhD. So you need to be you need balance, right? Whether you want to go there or you want to stay at university and focus more on research. Okay, so that was roughly my PhD journey. I think was like, I think the one feeling in my PhD is that I always feel that I have very limited time, but I have so many things that I want to do, right? So I think the most important skill there is like, how can you do the time management? Okay, so that was something that I feel I think like it was kind of productive, fulfilling, but it's also very struggling and stressful. Yeah, but after you went through that process, you feel like you have a completely new understanding on research, and you will become much more independent after you graduate. Okay, and after the PhD, so now, if you really want me to give advice, first I think Dr. Xiao is very good at this kind of thing, right? He actually compiled a lot of advices. So I think it's very important for you guys to read them all, right? Maybe at the beginning when you're first reading them, you will think, okay, this thing I know, right? And that thing I know, right? But right now, after I become a professor and I go back to read this thing again, I have a completely different feeling, right? So this is just some of the things that are called soft skills, right? Some of them, they actually are very important, right? I think in many cases, right, many PhD students are very talented, right? And in the end, whether your paper get in or whether you are doing better than the others, maybe it's depending on your soft skills and your last mile endeavors, this kind of thing. Okay. So I'm not going to repeat all like the good advice from Dr. Xiao. I'm just going to talk from my viewpoint and from my my angle, like how can you be successful in your PhD, right? And I think this part, I would welcome you guys to ask questions on every point that I talk about. I think like, yeah, I think Dr. Xiao, if you have something to comment, or you are also welcome to do that, right? I think all of this you are very familiar with, right? So first, I think to be successful in PhD, you must be self-motivated, right? So first, I think when you are doing the research in software engineering, of course, coding is one of the biggest part, right? So you have to continuously coding, trying new tools, writing your code, doing experiments, right? And the second thing, important thing is to read papers. I think reading papers is maybe the most important thing in your early stage, because you have to know the state of art research, right? And you have to know different kinds of techniques, right? And then, so reading paper is one of is the only way that can get you there, right? You can't just rely on the textbook on this kind of thing. We are doing research. Lots of research haven't been seen in the textbook, and you wouldn't be able to find it in the lectures that given by the professors, right? Of course, some of the research oriented courses may have part of it, but you still, I think reading paper is the major source for you to gain those kind of knowledge and to change your thinking and these things, right? And then the third important thing is that you have to write, right? So I think after you're reading some of the papers and when you try to write your own papers, at the first few times, you may have this kind of feeling like, I sit in front of my laptop and then after maybe 3 hours or 4 hours, I only write 2 or 3 lines, right? And you got frustrated and you say, okay, maybe writing is not that important. I can do it at the end after I finish all the project. But I think that's kind of the mindset that prevent you from getting better in your writing. I think we should do more frequent writing, more early writing, and also when you are writing something, you are actually trying to not just writing what you have done, it's explaining why you are doing it and what's the takeaway message you want the readers to know, and you are also summarizing your findings. So this actually require a more object skills from you, right? So when you're writing code, right, code is objective, right? When you run, of course, you have some pseudo random number, right? If we're taking that factor out, right? If you're doing just a coding, it's very objective, right? You give this input, I give you that output, right? But writing and reading is different, right? So the same paper, the first time you read it and the second time you read it, you have different kinds of understanding. Same thing when you're writing your introduction, right? The first time you write it and the second time you write it. And maybe the third time you decide, the first 2 times, the introduction I wrote earlier was complete trash, right? I have to rewrite it, right? But you wouldn't be able to get to the later stage of your introduction without writing the first 2 versions that you throw away. So it's kind of a process that you have to go through, right? So I still remember some of the stories like when I was in PhD and I haven't been very successful in writing papers, and I asked some of the senior PhD students, like, so I see at that time I remember I was doing internships in IBM research, and there was one senior student there. He has already published several top papers, and I asked him like, I need to write my first paper, but I'm very struggling because I don't know what to write, right? Every time I write, it seems I already put out all I know, but I still feel like it's not quite right. It doesn't get there, right? And he gave me advice. It is because you haven't read enough papers. So the advice that he gave to me is like, before you write your first introduction, you need to at least read more than 100 papers, right? At least you need an introduction of more than 100 papers before you really start to write your own introduction, right? So at the time, when I heard about that numbers, I said, okay, that's too much, right? So you can imagine maybe when you read your first SE paper, you probably spend maybe 2 or 3 days to fully understand one paper, right? Okay, yeah, man, some of you are genius. You may understand in 1 hour, then you can ignore my comments, right? But for me, it took me several days to finish my reading my first paper, right? And things becomes better when I read more and more, right? But at that time, when they told me, oh, you need to read more than 100 paper, I said, wow, that's a lot, right? Then maybe some of the things that you wouldn't be able to achieve is very difficult, right? But right now, I mean, these days, right, when I am a faculty, right, this year is special. I have a PC of several conferences, and just by writing comments for papers, I already write almost like 50 papers just the summer. So you can imagine actually reading 100 papers is not that much, but at the beginning you may feel, okay, this is something that is very, very difficult, but in the end it's just like some of the normal things that people really in this area that constantly doing, right? And then another professors, right, also gave a similar advices, right? You say, okay, if you stack the paper you read, right, if the height of your paper is as high as a stapler, right, as I show here, right, then maybe you are starting to understand what's in your area, right? Okay, so I think these are a very similar advice, is that you have to read a lot, right, before you can really know how to express your own idea and start writing, right? Okay.
Is the papers double-sided or are they single-sided?
Do you think that's very important? Even one-sided, that's a lot, right? You can count at least like 10, or like maybe you just reading 10 easy paper, right? Before you write your first one, still is a challenge. Yeah, but let's talk about something. But these days I can see that many of the students, they probably just read one paper and they start to write, and you can imagine what's the outcome, right? And even you help them revise their paper, they wouldn't understand why you do that. So I think that's something that you have to do by yourself, right? It's like you want to be an Olympic champion, right? You do training by yourself, right? Like Kobe can see the sun of Los Angeles, right, at 4 a.m., right? So you read the easy paper at 4 a.m. as well. Same thing. But I mean, back in old days, every time exit deadline is 7 a.m. in US. I remember my first exit paper. Dr. Xiao was there with us until 8 a.m. Yeah, we left the lab at the same time. So you can imagine I say at the time Suresh was also with us. So we three saw the sun in North Carolina at that time. Yeah, for our paper. Okay. Yeah, so for this part, like if you have questions, just ask. Yeah, I think for advice, it should be the style that we discuss more. That would be more effective. Yeah. Okay.
I can start with the question maybe.
Sure.
So I read a lot of stuff, but and I read a lot of papers too. But what I don't know is when you recommend reading papers, especially to write your paper, can you give some examples maybe on how that can actually help? Like, what am I looking for when I read other papers in order to write my own paper?
Okay, I think that's great. Yeah. So usually when you start reading papers, you will pick some of the papers that is considered the most cited paper, most important paper in specific area, right? For example, if you're working on software testing, right, and you should read the most related one, or maybe starting with the most recent one, and then you look for their related work section, right? And I think sometimes you usually put those paper names into the Google Scholar, and then you look at the citation number. Sometimes the paper with most citations, usually they have most citations doesn't mean they are the best, but they are very likely to be the best in the area. So that's why people keep citing it, right? And reading those papers will give you a basic understanding on this technique. And then you continue to look for more in there, especially I think like you look for some of the key techniques as citations. Yeah, so for example, like when you talk about software testing, at the time I was working on, my first paper was software testing. So I have to read symbolic execution based paper, and then look at how the recent year people are doing that, and then look at back in the old days why this technique was proposed, right? So you accumulate some of the basic knowledge, and then this basic knowledge only help you understand a technique. But if you really want to write your introduction, you need to know what's the recent trend, right? So then you have to focus more on like the recent paper they're citing this paper or compare with this paper, and then you want to know about why they compare, and then they can be published, right? They must be like providing a new technique. They must be providing a better technique than the existing one. So that they can publish, or they did a new study, right? All of those things would be some good insights for you to read. So of course, after you reading, accumulate accumulated some number of papers that you already read in some areas. Then later, when you grab one paper, you actually just need their key takeaway messages, right? So every paper you put it out, right? You can imagine the first paragraph is like what problem they're working on, why this problem is important, right? And then why this problem is challenges, and how do they solve the challenges, right? Most of the time, you just want to look at what are the challenges and why they solve the challenge, and you can stop there, right? Because later part, the details may not be really related to what you want to know, but the key thing is that you can quickly get an understanding on their ideas, right? So you probably, if you usually want to have I think like Dr. Xie used to advocate doing a paper categorization, right? Yeah, it took a lot of time to do that, but when you really want to write your own papers, you are actually doing a similar thing, because later in your related work, you need to categorize how much work are related to you in different aspects. And also, you will also want to know like the reason change and why you are different or you are better than the reason technique. So that kind of like give you a guidance on like how you can read those papers, because you are in the end you are serving your own research. So another caveat is like I do encounter some of the students, they want to read all papers, right? It's just like brute force, right? I want to read all papers, right? It doesn't mean it's not okay, but it's just like you don't have unlimited time, right? You can't say, okay, I need to read tens of thousands of papers before I do anything, right? And that's too late, right? So, and also that was not a best practice. The best practice is like you do your things, and at the same time you also read papers, right? And sometimes maybe when you are stuck, you may reserve a few days just to read papers. That's totally fine, right? But you need to keep alternate between experiments and coding and then reading, right? So to help you improve your understanding and also get more understanding from your practice, right? If you don't run some code, you don't run some tool, you never can fully understand some of the sentences that people put in the paper. Sometimes you see, okay, some of the conclusions they have, right? Maybe the simple sentences, right? But actually to write that sentences, they went through a lot of experiments to make sure that, right? I think that's the key things that we need to do about the reading. Okay. So then maybe I can move to the next point. I think the second part is also a very important part, is to how do you look for ideas, right? So I think many of you guys, when you first join a PhD program, one of the things facing on is like what problem I should work on, right? So sometimes you may be given an ideas, and then you need to explore it and then implement it and do it, right? And sometimes you will you try to you were given a direction, and you don't have a concrete idea, and you need to figure out, okay, in terms of there's quite some people are working in this area, and what problem I should work on, right? And this kind of thing, right? So there are different kinds of way for you to look for your ideas. But based on my experiences, and so I summarized the research into just like 4 types of things that you can think of your ideas. First is the most straightforward, is try to improve the existing technique, right? So I think in my first project, we were trying to investigating text, right? Also symbolic execution for text generation. So we want to improve it, right? And so then you have some goal that is kind of clear, but how to improve is another thing that you have to think of new ideas, these things. So then the challenge is on the problem setting is there, right? And then the technique is there. You try to improve it from different kinds of angle, right? And then you do it, right? Those are the first type of the research. This type of research, it give you a advantage is like people already went through identifying the problems and the things, right? So when you write your introduction, the first few paragraphs are kind of straightforward, right? What's the problem? Why is it important? What are the challenges, right? People already know that, right? So you have a lot of things to follow, right? And the second type of research ideas, it will be empirical study, right? So you're seeing some of the problems are important. For example, these days, cybersecurity is important, or quantum computing, right? It's important, but how they can be used in software engineering, we don't know, right? Then we do an empirical study, right? So you pick up some of the topic that people haven't known, and then you conduct an empirical study. I think this is very useful. Usually you come up with new ideas, and maybe if your empirical study has a lot of valuable data, then you may publish a paper out of it. Otherwise, it could serve as the first half of your paper later, right? So based on empirical study, typically you can come up with approaches. Maybe the approaches would be not that sophisticated. Like this year, we have an ICSI paper. We are investigating the market policy in app markets, and how these market policies, like people. So essentially, when you submit the app to the app market, right? So the app market probably will run some automated tool to simply check whether you have some malicious behavior, right? But after that, do you think all the apps in the market do not have like undesired behavior, right? The answer definitely is not, right? People are constantly complaining about apps areas, right? And so the different app markets, they actually have this kind of developer policies. These kind of developer policies are talking about what kind of app you should put on the market. So we just want to know whether these policies are strictly enforced, or like whether you can find app with behavior that violated those policies. How do we do it? We study the user comments, right? If people use the app, they found out the app has this behavior and is forbidden by the policies, they will complain, right? So then we just doing an empirical study, mainly on mining those user comments and summarizing our findings. So in the end, we also develop a very simple, straightforward text analysis approaches to analyze user comments, right? But I think if you just publish a paper on the text analysis paper, that's too thin, right? But our empirical findings is the major things, right? So combined together is a good paper. So that's why this direction is also kind of interesting. And then the third way is a new problem, right? So sometimes you see you have some technique and you identify new problems. I think that's pretty good, right? So for example, like when I interned in IBM research, I learned about those text analysis technique. And then when I went back to NC State and talk with Dr. Xie and Dr. Xie, they said, oh, maybe this technique can also apply on API documents, right? So it's a new problems for us to apply the technique, and that went out pretty well as well. Yeah. So, but the new problems typically would require you have some infrastructures or something that already built up, and then you have the capability to pursue it. So that would be easier. And finally, is the new directions, right? I think that's the most challenging ones, right? For example, recent years is like automated repair is kind of a new direction that proposed by Claire, right? So that was something that is kind of very challenging. It really requires a lot of thinking before you, and a lot of reading and understand before you can really know, okay, some new directions could be proposed. Okay, like blockchain, this kind of thing, right? New direction, totally. That's the kind going to be very difficult. Okay, but I think that's the 4 types of idea that I'm summarizing, and also I recommend one of the articles that recently published by the professor in University of California, Riverside, right? He wrote a very good paper in summarizing how his PhD students are looking for different kinds of idea and the struggles they have. I strongly suggest you guys spend a few minutes to read it as well. Yeah. But so I think for this part, like, do you guys have any experience you want to share, or maybe you have some questions that we can discuss for? I think many of you are junior students, right? So facing similar situation. Wing, can they talk, or you have to unmute them? Or
no, they can talk. I don't know. You can ask some of them. I mean, you can ask maybe you can pick a student and ask how they're picking their idea right now.
Maybe okay. Then let's pick one students in Illinois and one students in Peking University. Okay.
Sure.
So maybe you pick one. Wing. Yeah. Pick one.
Fine. Yes. Let's ask Neil. Neil is one of our best UIUC students.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you for calling me the best, but I don't think I am the best.
I said one of the best, but not the best. One of the best. We're all the best.
Okay. Yeah. I strongly agree that we need to read more papers to understand the topic before writing a draft, and of course before sending it to like your advisor. I strongly agree with that point. Personally, I read many papers because the field I'm currently working on is fairly new, like the Spectre thing. So there aren't too many papers to catch up, but I can imagine like in the traditional SE, there will be like much more papers to read, and I think people should read those papers.
Yeah. So usually, what's your strategy for reading the papers, right? So you typically like one paper, you just read it from the top to the bottom, like one day finish it, or you have a schedule to reading it.
Start from the abstract to see what's the high level idea. If it seems interesting, jump to the technique, because like after you work in the field for a while, you don't need to know their motivation. It's very obvious. Just go to the technique, go through the results. If you find those are interesting, then read more, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So I think this is great, right? So essentially, it's like more like reading a set of related paper, as you said, right? If you are trying to improve the existing technique, right, you don't need to care about the problem definition and those because you know them very well, right? So that's why I said, like, usually when reading this paper, you are trying to find out like whether you can improve some of that technique, right?
Yeah, agree.
Okay. Yeah. So then maybe we can have someone from the Peking University talk. Someone
Anyone volunteer? Peking University? If no one volunteer, then Win, you randomly pick one. I don't want to be the bad guy.
Sure. Let's have Zhenwen, right? Zhenwen is co-group organizer. So Zhenwen's also a new student, should be picking new problems to work on.
Cool.
Zhenwen, do you hear us? Do you hear me?
Which one?
Zhenwen Li.
Zhenwen Li. Oh, I see. Yeah. Should we poll him?
Okay, he typed in the chat. He said yes, but you want to kind of unmute yourself and maybe describe a bit on how you look for ideas, how you read research papers.
I mean, when we are waiting, maybe Zhenwen could take some time to think about. I could jump in to, he said MSI couldn't use the microphone. So I think very good discussion. I just want to add a few points. One is, I think typically when I say choose what to work on, there are three circles, right? Actually, I did not invent that. I think at least YY Zhou used that on her slides, and I don't think she invented that. I mean, someone else probably already raised the point. Basically, one is to focus on what you are interested in or what you are passionate about, right? Some people may like building tools, some people may like empirical studies, right? Some people may like theoretical stuff. So that's like what you like. Second dimension is what you are good at, right? Basically competitive advantage, right? Because you are competing not just, I mean, within the group, within the university, within the department, but around the world, right? In the research community. So you need to focus on something that can match your strengths, right? The background or the environment, small environment, the group, like your advisor and whatnot. The third one is like a focus on something that would matter or would have impact, right? Again, impact could be measured in so many different ways. Maybe some people would like to focus on fundamental problems that maybe only around the world, only like 5 people could understand their work, could read their paper, but it's so important, right? And that's also okay if you are comfortable or appreciative of that kind of impact, right? Because eventually maybe more people would benefit from your technology or your theory, right? I mean, but not like immediately your own work. So for this, I think like, of course, what Xusheng presented would be quite general. But once you have so many, I think here's like improving existing techniques. There are static analysis techniques, right? There are serial improving techniques. There are test generation techniques. There are test oracle techniques, or there are different other kind of techniques. So I think they still have a choice, right? What to focus on. I think the 3 dimensions that I just mentioned could be helpful. I think like for students in our like, I mean, current student in our group, I mean, I can see, for example, some students may be very good at the theory side, right? Like Lin Yi, right? I mean, I couldn't fully understand like Lin Yi's like a theorem, right? I mean, that's as an example, right? Some other students maybe pretty good at empirical studies, right? Some other students may be pretty good at building tools or very, very good tools. So I think that's also important dimension to think about what you are good at, and start from there to find things that could leverage or take advantage of the so-called your competitive advantage. Of course, not only that, that's why in the group, right? For me, I also spend time and also think quite hard in terms of setting up collaboration platform, right? So that we have competitive advantage throughout the collaboration platform, not only just you as a particular student, right? So I just want to add this point.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So if Zhengwen cannot talk, maybe I can move to the next point. Yeah.
Yeah, or pick another student or move on to another one. But we should let Peking University students know later on we need to at least pick 1 student before you finish your talk to share.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's the rest of my points for the PhD students, and then I have 1 slide for the for faculty. Yeah. So I think another important advice to be a successful PhD student is to work with your advisors, right? So I think before you go for PhD, you may think of your advisor like as a role, playing the role of teacher, right? So like for example, like high school teacher, this kind of thing, like they know everything, right? And then you have to, if you follow your advisor's advice, definitely you finish the homework and then you get the award, this kind of thing, right? But when you go for PhD, that's not the rule, right? Even you did everything your advisor told you, sometimes you may not get a paper published, right? A lot of factors coming in, right? But that's why the key, I think the key problem here is like, because we are doing research here and we're advancing knowledge, we are not doing homework that is already, the knowledge has already been known. We are just trying to repeat what the other people do. Maybe you will use a different way to achieve the same goal, but that goal was already well achieved before. So you were doing homework. But when we're doing research, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? You don't know what's the end point of some technique. For example, you say symbolic execution has been investigated for many years, right? But till today, still, it has a lot of limitations, right? Tons of paper published, none of them solve this problem completely, right? So that's why it's called research, right? You have to keep improving and keep inventing new things, and you are touching the unknown part of the human knowledge, right? So in that case, the law of the advisor is actually quite different. And then I think it's very important for you to know, like, when you talk with your advisor or when you try to leverage the help from an advisor, actually is one of the first important thing that you know is like the advice they given by your advisor does not guarantee you can reach the endpoint, but it can save you a lot of times in futile experiments, right? So it's like, here I show a maze, right? It's like a guide in the maze, right? But in the end, whether you can reach the endpoint of the maze is still by yourself, right? But I can give you a guide, right? So why I'm saying that is because, like, these days, same thing when I interact with my students, right? So you can see that sometimes they may ask the questions like, okay, if I do this, will it work? I have to tell them, I don't know, right? If you don't do it, I really don't know, right? I just have some feeling that maybe this technique will work well for these sub problems, right? But in the end, you put everything together, whether you will work or not, I don't know, right? And whether you will perform better than the existing one or not, I don't know. We have to do experiments, right? But sometimes they may say, okay, I want to do this. And if I know, okay, that was already done by other group, all right, then I can save you time, right? Don't try it, right? They already have that. You can use there too, right? So it can save you a lot of times in trying some of the tools that have already been built, right? Or like some of the problems that people have already studied, and then you don't have to reinventing the wheel, right? Save you a lot of time, right? So this also get to the second point, like, then you have to leverage the time of your advisor very in a smart way, right? So actually every time you should be prepared before the meeting, right? So I think this is, it really depends on different kinds of student style, right? Some students like to make slides, some students like to make notes, and some students just don't do anything before they come to meet you, right? So there's different kinds of style. But in the end, I mean, for you to be successful, you need to know before the meeting, what do you want from your advisor, right? And what kind of things that you want to get, or after the meeting, what goal you want to achieve, right? So you're not just doing that, okay, I'm just doing this meeting to report what I have done, right? The most important thing is like you encounter what kind of problems, and then whether some of the questions that if I ask my advisor in the one-on-one meeting, after that, the advice you get me can help me solve the problem quicker or better, right? So I think that would be a better way to utilize the meeting with the advisors, right? So it's very important, right? And even though your advisor may not give you immediate answers, right? But sometimes the discussions, the brainstorming can still help you to improve your approach, right? So I think this is this is some of the practice that you have to do. And also another thing is like, every time you log your paper, and then your advisor will help you revise your paper. And I think it's very important that you go back to check the history of how your advisor revised your paper, and think of why he wrote it this way, why he revised it this way, right? What did I miss? Why when I wrote the first sentences, I did not write it in that way, right? Or do I agree with this kind of revision or not? I think this kind of thinking process will help you quickly understand or gain the experience from other people. So essentially, you can learn different things. Or this will also not just applicable to advisor. This is also applicable to all your collaborators. For example, if you do an internship and then you work with your research advisor, if they help you revise your paper, right, you can also learn from them, like, oh, that's their way of thinking, right? maybe it's more practical, right? If they look at this problem for a more practical way, oh, that's their conclusion, right? Or maybe something that I can improve from the angle as well. So I think that's also a good thing that you know. So it's very important to know your advisor's style and then work with your advisor. But in any case, you should be prepared and then try to learn from the best practice that can given by your advisors. And then the next point is really coming. Yeah.
Let me
Yep.
add a few points. I think yes, working with the advisor is very important. Xusheng already listed those very important key points. I just want to add 2 points. One is like I mean I'm keeping improving myself, right, and reflecting. I think that's very important. For example, after I met with students, particularly at Peking University, over quite some weeks, right, and especially with students who are doing internship, for example, at Alibaba, right. I just feel like, I mean, the meeting with these students are not efficient, or the time is not best invested on the right place, because I just feel like the student just blah 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 to talk about the progress, right? And I mean, from my side, I don't really get a lot of reaction. I mean, in terms of my reaction, right? I mean, a lot of places are just somewhat boring to some extent, right? And I already know. I mean, there's no point to just read the bullet points there and then tell me the details. And recently I have revised the meeting styles. Basically, before the students come to meet with me, or in the beginning of the meeting slot, the student need to share their slides with me, and then I can browse the slides offline. Right? There are two styles. One is I browse all the slides by myself and identify places that we need discussion or unclear, so that I can ask questions student can explain. Or I can slide by slide, depending on the different, I mean, meeting or different contents. I find this very useful to guide our discussion on the right place, right? Because sometimes one bullet point on the student slides actually could cause us to discuss for 20 minutes or 10 minutes, right? It's not like even distribution of the time to talk about just debrief me, right? I mean, that's not the point. The point is the meeting is to guide our discussion, to allow me to help students to solve the difficulties, or like interesting discussion point to brainstorm, right? Spend time to really on the right place. So that's a new practice that I have found very useful to guide our discussion on the right place. That's first. Second point I want to mention actually was pretty fresh. Yesterday I have discussion with Hao Yu, PhD student from Peking University. So the scenario was that I asked Hao to try a particular technique, right, to improve the results. And then Hao yesterday came by and say, see, I mean, it doesn't work. It actually get worse, right? So not only Hao, right? I mean, actually in the past, many students have this particular tendency or the style. Basically, of course, for me, I think exactly like what she mentioned, right? I'm just hand waving, right? I mean, I'm not in the first frontier to get my hands dirty to get the result. I don't even sometimes see the actual concrete result, first-hand result, right? I had to rely on students report the result over the slides or over the meeting to know what's going on. So I may throw out some ideas, right, without having enough information, and likely the idea may not work, right? More importantly, I think for House yesterday scenario, like for the idea I raised, if you try this idea, likely it may not work, right? But likely it may work. But if it doesn't work, it requires additional thinking, additional ideas to work together side by side with the idea that I propose. And then we may have high hope, or at least hope, the results may be improved. But students may just have these somewhat sitting back, right? Oh, last week you asked me to do this, right? See, it doesn't work, right? So what now, right? I mean, basically waiting for me to give another idea. I mean, the problem is that the cycle could be too long to really get to the whole solution that we really need, right? Because like 1 week, you just wait for student to get result and come back. So another thing is that when I'm busy or I'm kind of a little bit lose patience, I mean, say maybe it's a dead end. Forget about it, right? Let's give it up. but we may miss some opportunities, right? So I think students need to have the mindset saying that the advisor give me the idea. Not only I just show, I mean, whether the idea works or not, I also need to think harder, being more critical, see how we can further improve the idea, right? And have some additional things that the ideas, the students themselves to come up, rather than rely on the advisor to give me another idea. I think that's very critical and also very common among students. It's not easy to really fight against that anti-pattern, right? I mean, kind of like using advisor as an idea generator, student as an executor, or the experiments, I mean, executor, or the result producer. I just want to add these 2 points.
Yeah, I think what Dr. said is very good complementary to my points, right? But my next point actually is quite close to what Dr. just described. It's like I recently find out that it is very important for PhD students to make mistakes, right? So I recently found out that several of my students, right, they propose some of the ideas. They say, okay, I want to do this. I want to do this text analysis technique, but I'm afraid it may not work, right? I'm afraid that maybe the result come up will show that our old approaches, our original thoughts was not correct. Then so I didn't do it. I say, why not, right? If it's a mistake, you need to make it, right? Right? You have to make mistake to understand that it doesn't work. So now you gain the experience and understanding. Oh, okay, actually this way, if I do it, that's not right, right? And then inspired by this mistake, now we can find out the way to better conquer these challenges, right? And also sometimes I would say we find out that, okay, many times we make a lot of mistakes, like we do this experiment, it fail, we do try that, it fail, right? And then we actually find out that, okay, if I fail on this part, right, maybe in the current stage, I don't know how to fix it, right? But maybe later when I have a new idea, I will be able to conquer it. Because, but now I need to remember this is one of the potential research directions that is challenging, interesting, and then later maybe I can conquer it. So you have to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. And you should actually try to make as many mistakes as possible. I mean, if time permitted, right? So to try different kinds of tool. If fail, it's okay. And I accumulate some experience of using this kind of tool, right? Or you know, okay, this kind of tool is limited. If I apply it, it fails definitely. So I later on when I try different approaches, I definitely know this wouldn't work, and I have to use other ways to revise it. I think this is a very important thing. So these days, I always tell my students, if you have something, just try it, right? Don't give me your estimates or your prediction. Just try it, and then fail it, and then show me the fail results. If the results, I mean, is really bad, then we know this way doesn't, it wouldn't go through, right? But we still can get some understandings extract from out of it, right? So because we don't want to run into some situation, it's like, oh, I think of a very compressed approach, and in the end, actually a relative simple approaches achieve the similar performance as your results, then you are doomed, right? You are actually over inventing something that is not necessary, right? So in that cases, we actually need to try more and make more mistakes and to correct our understandings, because it's just like this maze, right? Probably there's only one path to the end, right? But in the middle, there could be many lots of paths that you can explore, right? And it doesn't mean exploring those long paths do not have values, right? It actually, when you accumulate enough long paths, you finally can figure out the correct path that they guide you through. So I think when you are a PhD student, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Actually, it's like If you are capable, make as many mistakes as you can, right? So then you can quickly learn a lot of things in a short time, right? So that's my personal advice, right? May not be correct in all the times, but I do see like this thing. And also when you make mistake, don't be frustrated or don't be angry, right? It's normal, right? If we need, I think this reflect back to my earlier point, right? So I always tell my students, they say that if I knew the answer, I wouldn't ask you to do that because I already knew if you do it, you will succeed. Then there's no point for you to do it, right? The point that I ask you to do is because I don't know whether you will succeed or not, right? You probably are making some mistake in the middle, but I don't know, right? So that's why you are asked to do it, right? If I already know 1 + 1 = 2, why you are going to do it, right? Everyone can do it. You don't need to do it, right? That's not our point, right? So I think making mistake is also one of the key things that you have to practice more, yeah. And then my another point is also some of my personal experiences. I think it's also very important. And I find out that this kind of some kind of emotion or some kind of thinking trend in lots of junior students, right? So I think like when you are doing your research, you should always aim for high, right? So when you are thinking about ideas, you may sometimes say, oh, this could be a ICSM idea, right? Oh, this could be some kind of like exact idea, right? So I don't think you should go for that route. You should like always think that, okay, if I'm doing a research, I'm going to improve the state of the art, right? Or I want to tackle new problems, right? So you don't want to spend your time to think of some idea that at the beginning and say, okay, maybe that was too difficult. I should aim for an ICSM. So maybe if I just do this, that will be enough, right? And then later, when you may try to comfort yourself, I say, okay, when I read some paper, I say, okay, see, this ICSI paper is crappy, right? And you go into the ICSI. So maybe when I look at my work, yeah, my approach is also okay, right? I don't need to improve it, right? So when I submit my paper to ICSI, it maybe get in, right? And so when you submit it, you get very harsh review and you say, okay, the system is not fair, right? And my PhD is doomed, right? The system is not fair, right? And some people are just lucky, right? They got into ICSI, and I'm not the one who is lucky, right? So I think that's just your mindset problem, right? So when you are looking at some problem, I think you should always keep in mind that like research, right? People trust your research. Of course, it cannot be completely objective, right? But people try to be objective and try to evaluate it from different kind of factors. But from yourself, you should understand that you want to really improve the research, right? And then sometimes you may not get to your goal in 1 paper or in 2 papers, right? But that's the goal you want to achieve, and you should continuously improve your paper. So you also may face some situation and say that, okay, I submit a paper, I get some review. Sometimes the review is harsh, and some reviewer may wrote a very irresponsible review, like very short reviews. I think this year's ICSI is better. We have moderator, so that kind of review will be immediately spot by the moderator and get corrected, right? But in many of the cases, other conferences, they may not have that, and you still see this kind of review, right? And then you got frustrated, and you say, okay, I disagree with the reviewer, right? But I don't want to improve my work. I just going to just simply change some of my writing to make sure that people don't be misguided by my writing, and then I can resubmit the paper, right? I think that's not a good practice and not a correct attitude, right? I have some like bloody experience in submitting some of my papers, right? I think like back in 2018, I got one Unix ATC paper. That paper I was rejected like at least 7 times. We submit to all the security top conferences, and it was rejected at 6 or 7 times. And finally, we submitted to the Unix ATC and got in, right? But if you think after we got rejected, we only do writing changes, that was not right, right? In the end, when we look at the accepted version and the first version that we submitted, we actually add tons more experiments to demonstrate the technique, the advantage of our technique, and we do a lot more comparison. We also modify some part of our approaches. And in the end, we think, oh, we actually did a lot of things in experiments. Then why not submit to system conference? Because system conference usually they value your experiments a lot, and then of course you get a lot more reviewer in your paper, right? They typically have like at least five people reviewing your paper. And in fact, the paper that when we submitted Unix ATC, the first reviewer who gave us the highest score, he wrote us a review. It's like a journal. It's very, very long review. And he's complaining our paper from the first section until the end. But in the end, he gave us the highest score. The reason is like, if he is not insisting in our paper, he wouldn't read through your paper from the first section until the end, right? But I can see that because his comments is he keep complaining from the first section until the last section. So you can imagine he must read through all your paper, right? I think that's already a successful thing that you did. You already impressed a reviewer, right? You keep him reading, right? Imagine like every time you got 8 or 10 papers to review, right? And then I cannot guarantee every paper you can read through the first until the end, right? It's very difficult, right? Sometimes you lost interest in the after you're reading the example section, you already make up your mind you want to kill the paper, right? But if you can keep the reviewer until the last sections, right? I think typically your paper is already doing a very good job, right? So we have that kind of positive things, right? After we get through this, right? But people may still think, okay, the paper has been rejected so many times, and we're lucky like this time we do some writing changes and then submit. Now, in the end, no. The key things that really got our paper in is that we added experiments with the Neo4j. So we do a lot more experiments in the end. So people appreciate that kind of effort and that kind of things. So I think that's the another key point I want to convey is like when you are doing a research, you always aim for high. You may not get there, but it will at least guide you through correct directions in terms of the your research. I think I want to follow one sentence from Dr. Is that if you do this, you are on the right track, right? You're on the right track. Okay. And okay, I think the final point of my advice is the time management. I think that's also some of the things that you guys already know. Like usually you submit your paper to a conference, right? For SE conference, it needs about 3 months to get the feedback, right? And if you submit a paper to security, these days they adopt a journal style. So it needs about a year, right? If you unfortunately getting a revise and then you really submit in 5 months, about a year, you can get the paper accepted, right? And if you want to graduate in 5 years, you actually only have 4 years to work because your last year you need to spend 1 semester looking for a job. And then even you submit paper in your last year, you wouldn't get published because of the timeline of reviewing, right? So you actually only have 4 years for you to submit paper. So all these things you need to keep in mind. If in the middle you also want to do internship, you also need to consider take out that chunk of the time, right? So you need to really know how much time you left, how many more tasks you want to do, and how do you allocate your time strategically so that you will be very effective in using your time. Okay, so I think that's all my advice for the for being a successful PhD student, right? So maybe we can have someone from the Peking University to talk. Or to discuss, right? Who want to volunteer?
Oh,
Yes, anyone from
actually,
Peking University. Yes. Go
yeah. Actually, I have a question.
Sure.
So, yeah. I'm a first-year PhD student from university. So, I have questions that so currently I have read some like papers like from different topics. So I may have some ideas that was from different topics. So yeah. So do you have any instructions that how to choose some. I mean, like for PhD, I think like if you want to finish a thesis, you should have like have pick one direction that and or the work you are focused on one direction. But currently, yeah, I have some ideas that from like different domains, different directions that they are not very related. Yes.
Okay, very good questions. Yeah, so I think like you guys can, I can give you my answers, but you guys feel free to chime in if you disagree with me or something. Yeah, so I think like as a junior PhD student, for your first few projects, you don't constrain yourself, as Dr. just mentioned, right? Interest is very important thing, right? And also your skill, right? And also, as I said, you need to make mistakes earlier and as often as possible. So if you have several ideas, right, just try it, right? If you have passion for it, just try it, right? Maybe after you try for some tools, using 1 or 2 days to quickly try, get some quick feedback. Okay, oh, that's how this area look like, right? And there's something that how they want to build, or you can download existing papers tool, right? Try to get them run on some data set, right? And then get some feeling on that, right? For example, like you want to do testing, then just write some tests and then use the tool, right? See the feedback and see whether that's something that you want to pursue. Or like you like mining, then let's mine something, right? And then see whether those results will get you excited or not, or whether you want to pursue further on this path. So you have to try it, right? And also, don't try to lay out your directions at your first year, right? So you have a lot of possibilities, right? You maybe change your directions in your second or third year. That's totally fine, right? I mean, if you can think of your first 2 years, you are accumulating your knowledge, you understand your skill, right? You can get some paper out, that's great, right? If you don't, also don't be frustrated, right? Situations different for different person, right? But maybe after you accumulate enough, you can get paper published in your third or fourth year. That's fine, right? And then you know how to pursue your really which direction for PhD thesis. Also, for your first or second year, if you can collaborate with some senior students to look at how they do their research, right? To learn from them, to see what kind of research they're doing and what's the result, or whether it interests you or not. So don't constrain yourself too much at your first 1 or 2 years. Of course, you also need to, as Dr. said, you need to know your competitive strength, right? Whether you are good at theory, you are good at tool building, or also you need to look at like in your research group, what kind of help you can get, right? Yeah, so that's just my thought, but I would suggest you try more. Yeah.
Can you maybe share with us how you pick your topic?
Right. So let me just add a few points. As you could see, our group is very like unconstrained, right? Because students actually had freedom to propose, or at least, I mean, tell me what they are interested in. Like, for example, nowadays, students like Lin Yi, right? I mean, working more on the AI side. And Angela working with some PL side, right? I mean, I actually provide these kind of environments to engage additional helps to guide your research, right? But of course, if in the end, like it would purely AI, right? Then I mean, it may be difficult for me to make a whole lot of contributions, right? But more or less, we are more for the best interest of the students to construct such environment as much as possible. But at the same time, students also need to think about like I mean, it's not like you are interested in one direction, then you just focus on it, right? I mean, as earlier we discussed competitive advantage and many other factors come into the pictures. So yes, I mean, you can have the freedom, actually you're encouraged to have the freedom to choose something that would interest you and you have passions on. but at the same time also think about the environment, the competitive advantage, etc.
Yeah. So maybe Win, you have something to say?
Yes, I was going to ask, how did you choose your topic, Xusheng? Maybe you can share with us so we can learn from your experience.
Mine may not be a good example, but I can share some of my thoughts. Yeah. So I think my first project was working on PACS, right? So at that time, like all our group was doing research in PACS because I think that's the competitive advantage at that time, because I think at that time, I think automatic text generation kind of hot during that period, right? These days, still hot, but not as hot as at that period time. So I was doing that, and then of course at the beginning I got a lot of help from Nikolai and also this kind of thing. So I would be able to quickly run the tool and build up my experiments. So that was kind of my my first papers. But in the end, I don't have to really go through choose my research directions in the automatic testing. In fact, later I will present my research. Although I want to continue that line of research, I don't find students doing that anymore. So yeah, that's also the things, right? So then when I went to IBM research, I learned text analysis. So okay, I figure out actually there's also a very interesting direction, and I can do research in terms of it. And finally, and then I went to Microsoft Research and find out like, okay, mobile smartphones, it was kind of hot at the moment. And I think research, like especially program analysis on smartphone at that time was actually the hot topic and the hot area to work on. These days, not as hot as that day, but still like a lot of things you can still do in terms of mobile app. And that's how I set up my directions from starting from there, right? So you actually need to try different kinds of things before you can reach the point that you really know what you're going to do. I still remember at that time, like because in our group, I'm the only one that use text analysis techniques and also like looking at mobile app, right? So at the beginning, it was very struggling because like when I was working on the automated testing, the first few paragraphs of the introduction is pretty easy to write. But when I start to work on this area, I may spend days just to write the first paragraph of my paper because I have to work on everything by myself. I have to read tons of paper before I can write down the first few sentences like, okay, why this problem is important. So now you see like sometimes when you encounter a new area, it's like the first chunk of your time was all spent in learning these new things, basic things about that, right? But after that period of time, later on when I started to write paper on mobile application analysis, this kind of thing is kind of straightforward, right? I already know all the related work, so it's pretty straightforward. How I'm going to structure this, how I'm going to write that, right? So it really needs a lot of trying and a lot of things. And finally, I think even for now as a faculty, I still continue my research in terms of program analysis on mobile apps. Yeah, so that's how I do it. It's like you have to. So I think it's still like I have to do the first automatic text generation paper so I can gain knowledge of program analysis and testing. And then when I encounter mobile app, I will have the skills to help me work on the implementation and also understand like some of the terms there and how I can pursue a new idea there. So that's why I said it's not necessary for you to define your direction on your first paper or on your first one, right? I think when you also work on several directions, right? Yeah. Okay, I see like Wei is also here, right? Wei, you want to share something or?
Yeah, I'm also here. Yeah,
Cool.
but yeah, my kids was very fast, so I didn't pay much attention to the meeting, but I was just monitoring. Yeah.
It's okay.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I think yeah, I agree with you and Tao just mentioned. But yeah, I think everyone should choose their own style of work, how they interact with the advisor, and how they choose topic, how they, for example, schedule their everyday schedule, right? And how they plan their time. You probably need some time to find a good practice that suits yourself. But I think once you found it, you may have a much better efficiency in pushing your research forward.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Okay. I think that's to conclude the sections, and then I can have some of the things that I can share about being a faculty. So I'm not the expert here. Yeah, I think Dr. C is the expert here. So I'm just going to share my experience. I think probably this part, like when you are on the market today, so some of this advice may be helpful for you. But so feel free to ask questions. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
thanks.
yeah, so I joined like Case back in 2017. Yeah. So it was when I first joined, I think it's kind of struggling because I think like when you first become a faculty, the first thing you need to encounter is like now you need to do your research by yourself. That part is actually that's just one thing because you you just graduate from your PhD, so you are actually constantly doing that. But then the next thing is like you need to write proposals and you need to teach, and that's the new challenge that you are facing, right? So from my personal advice, I think the first important thing is like you need to write your proposals first, right? So because writing a proposals is very different from writing a research paper, right? So when you are writing a paper, you are describing something that you have done and you have done it in a successful way. But when you are writing a proposal, you are proposing something that you haven't done, right? And also you are not sure about the outcomes. Or you're probably sure like if it's successful, what kind of good things you can get, right? But you're not sure about whether what you propose will succeed. But this time, of course, something that you propose most likely will succeed. But it just depends on the style of your writing your proposals, right? So, but as a faculty, the first thing is like you need to know what kind of proposal you can write and what kind of proposal you should write first, right? So I think this change every year. So when some of my advice here may not be applicable to you, but I do think each year you should spend some time to first investigate like what kind of things that you want to write, right? So when I first joined, NSF just made a significant change that allow junior faculties like to submit to CII. I think before 2016 or something. Usually, faculties are not. CII has very strict requirements, like only like US citizens can submit, I think, at that time. I don't know. But when I joined, I was told that I can submit to NSF CII. So, but it's a tough choice. So CII require that this must be your first proposal, and you couldn't have other proposal accepted. And if you submit a CII, you can submit another small or something at the same time, but that wouldn't work well because the CII was aimed for the things that fund you before you really can write your career proposal. So it has a lot of restrictions, right? But at that time, when I was started, I decided to write this CII, and luckily it was I got in at the first round of the submissions, right? It has some good sides, it also has some bad sides, right? The good side is like it gave me the first chunk of money that I can use to support students, right? Although at that time, usually you have startup funding, so your first few students is okay, like you don't worry about that. But that CII also give me some confidence in writing proposal, but I think it's fake confidence, right? So after I failed several times, I know like CII is totally different, right? So because CII usually is shorter, and your competitor is also different. Although the acceptance rate is still low, I think at that year, when I submit the CII, it's like 20% acceptance rate, like for all area, for my area, the statistics released by NSF is like they receive 100 proposals and they funded 20 of them, right? And for these 20 is including algorithms, software, and security, this kind of thing, right? So you can imagine each area only funded several, right? So luckily I got in, and it has some good sides, like you have first chunk of money. The best thing is like, after that I saw, oh, maybe I know how to write proposals, and that's completely wrong, right? Because when you're writing a small, it's totally different style. So but the writing of CI kind of like made me feel like, okay, maybe writing proposals I can just use that same style, right? But then later I learned some harsh lessons. So that's like something that you need to keep in mind. Different years they have different requirements, and when you're writing that, there are not general things that you can get. And also with the CII got funded, it makes it more difficult for you to write career immediately, because CII was supposed to be pre-career funding. And if you haven't used up your CII and you want to submit to career, the program manager may think, then why did you get CII, right? You haven't used up the money, right, yet, right? And now you apply for new money, right? But you haven't used that up, the one that you get to support your career, right? I mean, so it creates also some other complication as well, right? So that's something that you have to pay attention. But I think like Wei told me, these days you can't submit to CII if your university provide you staff funding. So these days this is not an option anymore, right? For Wing, right? But maybe.
Sorry, can you give an overview of what CRI even is, for those that may not be familiar?
Yeah, so CRI is just one kind of called like initiative proposal from the NSF. It requires you to be a junior faculty, like you must graduate. It must be within 5 years after your. You cannot graduate the. I forgot the exact time, but roughly is, if you already graduated from a PhD for more than 5 years, you are not qualified. So it's only designed for junior faculty. And also you can only try twice. And it must be submitted in the first 3 years. You cannot include summer salary at that time when I try to submit it, right? So, but you can imagine your competitor was all the junior faculty, the first 3 years junior faculty. So the competition is not like the small that you compete with all the faculty in US. That's much tougher, right? And the acceptance rate is lower, right? But it has other restrictions, like it was supposed to be support you for research, so you can write your career proposal. So it have different kind of connections in that, and you know career proposal, right, Win?
Yes. Also something you submit, right, within the first couple of years.
Yes. That's like career proposal is like you submit before you get tenure, and it's for 5 years. Yeah. So essentially, it's like that's something that usually you got it. That's a very good recognition, right? And small is just like normal NSF grant, right? But small's competition maybe is harsher than career because you compete with all the other faculties. But for career, you compete with all the assistant professors, right? If you tenure, you are not qualified to submit career. Okay, and so I think it's very important. Like when you first become faculty, you need to get to understand all the details of this proposal, and then choose be careful to choose your first proposals right. And also you should look for some internal fundings, right? Sometimes university may have some internal funding that you can compete for, right? And that's very easy to get usually because they give extra consideration for junior faculty sometimes. Yeah, so you also need to look for, and this varies from institution to institutions. Yeah, so I personally get very little money to support some undergraduate students for the summer, but I think it's a very good recognition when you put in your CV to say, okay, you get some internal funding to support undergraduate research. So that's also something you may pay attention to, right? So and then another mistake I make at the beginning of my at the beginning of my faculty career is like I look at the beginning. I try to write a lot of collaborative proposals. So when you first join university, lots of people may welcome you and senior people talk, and then they may tell you, oh, I have some idea, and maybe if you haven't used up your quota, I can submit collaborative proposal with you, right? So when you are a junior, probably you may think, okay, that's good, because maybe at the beginning you don't have too much time and you don't have too much understanding. So you will say, okay, I probably can focus on writing one proposal, and for the rest of the proposal, I can collaborate with the others, right? So I think that's also a good sign, a good thing. Because here I need to give you some background. Like NSF require that each year you can only submit 2 core proposals. So your quota is 2. Either you are a PI or you are co-PI. So whether you are leading the project or you are collaborating with some other PI, right? So if you write one, then you have another one for collaborative, right? It's not like paper, you can submit as many as you want, right? For proposal, there is a limited number of proposals that you can submit. Okay, so at the beginning, I just say, okay, I don't have enough energy to write so many proposals, so probably I just write one and then I try to collaborate with the others, right? And then you use up my quota, and turn out all my collaborative proposals were rejected, right? The problem is like sometimes it's just like because you're friends of some faculties and try to collaborate with them, right? And you think we make a good team, right? But in the end, when you submit your proposal, right, people don't think of your proposal in that way, right? It's peer reviewed by other professors who don't know you, right? So that's the problem, right? So, and in the end, the best situation would be like you collaborate with other people, and then your expertise ideally will be complementary to each other. So this year, I think last year I finally got my first small SATC proposal. It's like we have a new faculties that work in the research of database join our departments, and I think my expertise in securities works very well with his expertise in database. So we develop a proposal that we want to develop a database querying technique for some security problems. And I think that's very interesting angle, and that proposal finally get in. So I think that's a good style, so like collaborate based on expertise, right? But not just a relationship like, okay, we are good buddies, so we write proposals together. I think that usually don't work out. And when your proposal is not like paper, right? For example, this year your proposal got rejected. Next year they may say, okay, then let's recycle it and resubmit it again. Then your quota will be occupied for several years, right? You may not want that. Okay, so this is something that you have to pay attention to every of your collaborative proposals. Try to make sure that your collaborative proposal is as high quality as your other proposals. Yeah, so that's the first advice that I should say about the proposal thing. I don't have too much experience in getting proposal awarded, right? But that's just, but still, I think there's something that I can share. Yeah. And the second thing that you need to face is the teaching, right? So for the teaching, I think some of the, you may think like, okay, if I publish very well and also I get funding support, I may be rated very highly in the departments. But if you are not teaching very well, some university may tolerate that, but some university may ping you in the end. So I think teaching must be good, right? It cannot be terrible, right? And also, it shouldn't be it must be a core part of your work, but it shouldn't be the most major part, right? Because in the end, your research is the most part, and teaching is a complementary way to help you grow your research. So at the beginning, yeah.
Just one add, like there are differences across different universities in terms of the expectation on teaching. Peking University teaching should be pretty good. Private universities, I guess, like Case Western Reserve, should be expected to be good because the student pay high tuition, right? Especially undergrad teaching. Peking University also pretty good. because this like the whole country's top student come here, right? You don't want to screw up the young mind, right? So the university pay high attention to it. I know for private university, UC Berkeley pay high attention to it on teaching because again the flagship of the whole university of the whole California, but also I mean it's pretty top. But I think other public universities typically may not pay such high attention to teaching. The common situation is saying that don't be a bad teacher, right? It's not saying like being a very good teacher in terms of tenure. So yeah, that's the differences.
Right. Yeah. So that's why I suggest you for teaching, just get as much help as you can, right? So sometimes you may think, okay, teaching is a big thing and you want to redo all the teaching material by yourself. I think that will take a lot of your time and maybe sometimes it's not worth it, right? So it's just like get as much help you can. You can borrow slides, adapt them and try to make, because you can't be a good teacher for your immediately, right? It's also a learning process, right? Your second time teaching the same course must be better than your first time teaching it, right? You will learn through the process, right? But I think the same thing, right? For teaching is make as many mistakes as you want, right? And then you learn from it. So, but try to get as much help as you can. And also don't try to teach everything in one course, right? So that's also a very important advice I got from some senior faculties, right? So you will say after you graduate freshly from a PhD, you may think, okay, my mind is full of knowledge and I want to pass this knowledge to the students so I can pick some of them to work with you. Don't think of that way, right? So if you push too much things into one course, right, students will give you very bad feedback because they couldn't understand. Second, they think there's too much to take in, right? Just follow the normal schedule and then I mean, if you think, okay, you can explain something in 2 lectures, then just cut some of them or else like this thing. In the end, it's like the students should learn all the required things they want to learn, right? And then if they learn it in a comfortable way, they will give you very good feedback. And also you achieve the goal of passing the knowledges, right? But if you just try to push a lot of more knowledges, especially like you want to push a lot of knowledge from your research to the students, and they may not work well. Okay, so for teaching, it's just like get as much help as you can, right, and try to excel, and then just then you can save a lot of time for research, right? So and then the third thing, the third dimension of independence is student recruitment, right? So I think this is different style, right? Different university and different systems, right? Some university have all the students coming in as TA, and then you pick, and then they choose to work with you. And some of the university they ask you to recruit them using TA by yourself, right? And then they directly work with you, but that really depends, right? So for my cases, I always work with the students first, right? I think I have 4 PhD students now. Two of them actually was my master students. They first work with me and I see their potential. And so I asked them whether they want to stay with me or not, right? And one was like a master student from Syracuse University. And then I interviewed him and then he came in as a TA. So and now he's one of my best students. So that depends, right? At the beginning, I thought he was probably the weakest students that I had, because I think he did many things in a very lousy way. But in the end, he's the one that is very responsive, right? So every time I write email, he's the first one to reply. In the end, now he's the most productive one. So you never know. Yeah, just like, but you have to work with the student first to know whether it has potential or it is self-motivated at least, right? For some of the students, if they really show they are not interested, I think then just don't waste at the time, right? So that's just my opinion. Yeah, different thing. But every students have their own interest and their own capability, as Dr. said, right? You have your passion in different areas. So you should try to encourage them and then let them choose the directions. But of course, at your first few projects, as a young faculty, I think you should ask your student to work in the directions that you are most familiar with, so that you can make sure that you can have some outcomes at your first few years. In fact, for my first few papers, I'm the first author, right? Because I wrote all the code, I did all the experiments, and the student helped a little bit in terms of that. So then I have to be the first author because they didn't even participate in the paper writing, right? So, but that was not a good thing, because if you write the paper when you are do the experiment when you are faculty, then you don't have time to write proposal, you don't have time to teaching, you don't have time to expand your group and doing the other things. So you have to teach your students to really carry out the research by themselves, so that you will be released from them. But I mean, it's a dream for every advisor, but right, but that's really very difficult to accomplish, right? Most of the time you feel like you just like work too much for the students, and the student may not learn anything. So I try to let my student do more, but it's a balance, right? Sometimes if you let them let the students do a lot of things by themselves, they may not have a progress. So you have to give advice after they try for some time, and then I think that's a balance that you have to learn by yourself. Also, different students have different style, right? So some students are very strong opinion, they are also very strong implementation skill. Then you just let him try, and after that you just telling him, okay, maybe we can try this way, right? But some students, they just have no idea like what to work on. Then at this situation, I think it would be great to ask them to read more papers, and also you give them some concrete ideas to work on. That idea may not be a publishable idea, but can help the students to get on the right track. Okay, so that's the students recruitment thing. I'm too junior to talk about this part. So, but just some experience that I had that they can share with Win, right? And then finally, I think is the most important part is your research, right? So I feel like the differences of looking at the research when you are a faculty, it's like when you are PhD students, you only work on one project. And the thing is like, of course, most of the time you're working on one project. Some of the PhD students may work on several projects in concurrent. That's a different situation. But here I'm just talking about the viewpoint is like, as a PhD students, you want to finish one project and you want to get that published, right? You think of one problem, right? But when you are a faculty, I see you are not looking at one project, right? You are looking at one direction, because when you write proposal, you are proposing something that you want to do in a relative long term, right? Not just like something that you want to finish in one paper, right? So you are more like, okay, I want to improve these directions, right? So that's a mindset change. Is also a very important thing. So when I wrote my first proposal at CII, it's still very like my paper style. So that's why I failed so many times after the CII when I submitted small, right? I always got rejected because people say, okay, your proposal is just like talking very short-sighted things, not very long-term research, right? So that kind of things that you need to learn by writing more and thinking more, and also you know, looking at the direction. So here I also want to give a very concrete example. So I still remember when I was in UIUC, and then at that time, I live with Wei, and we sometimes talk about the research on mobile app, because at that time Wei was also interested in mobile app. We keep discussing, and some of our discussions kind of like, I mean, went into nothing. But some of the discussion, you actually went into very good publication, like the app context we published in UIUC 2015, right? That was the idea that we talk about. I still remember in that crappy bedroom, right? We have my bedroom even have the doors that was broken, right? They can't sing. So, but we did come up with very good idea in the environment. So I really appreciate that time, right? But I remember that in one of our group meeting, when we were drawing like, okay, that's the research of mobile app. We want to do this and want to do that, right? And now have challenging problem 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's something that we couldn't do right now. Like for example, I remember one thing is like, oh, we have the requirement here, and then we have the code here. So from the requirement pointing to the code, we have feature location, but we don't know how to do feature location, right? Because the requirement is written in natural language and code is written in programming language, the totally different domains. And then we don't know how to fill this link, right? And then from the code, we can go back to link to the API documents, right? And that was one of our paper. And then we draw those big pictures. And at that time, we try to see, oh, what does this link mean? And how can we think of ideas that if we want to complete these pictures, right? So it was some kind of practice that we did when we were still junior. We have a lot of ideas. But at that time, we lack of the skill to implement those ideas. But when I become a faculty and with the advances of the machine learning technique and my understanding on different kinds of things, now I start to think of that pictures as more and more concrete. And I think like these days, my research, which I'm going to present briefly after this, is actually can be all come from that overview pictures that we draw in that backboard in the, I think in one of the classroom in the Illinois. So that's a very funny thing that I think of these days is like, okay, maybe at that time we just slow some idea that we don't know how to do, but now I really am conquering one each of the idea that at that time we pointed out, right? So really it's a funny thing. So when you have some brainstorming with your peer students, right, always try to write them down or keep in the mind. Maybe you cannot solve them these days, but later probably with new technique or with your new understandings, that may be your directions that you can pursue, right? So okay, so I think that's all my experience for being a junior faculty. Yeah. So I think maybe you have some questions to ask, or maybe doctors have something to chime in. Yeah.
Yes, I can ask a question, but before I do that, I do want to say that we should try to wrap up in the next 5-10 minutes, Xusheng.
Okay, no problem.
And I know that you hadn't had too much to go into your research, but if and when you do, you may just want to keep to the highlights.
No problem.
In terms of question, the main question I would have had actually is, as a new faculty, how much help do you get from others, and what kind of help do you get, and how do you get that help?
Cool. Yeah.
Maybe it's three questions.
Okay. Yeah. So I think you should get help from research, proposal, and teaching all together. Yeah. But you can seek this kind of help from different set of people, right? So when I try to write my proposals, I try to ask whether some faculty who have successful experience in writing proposals, whether I can use their proposals as template, right? Or I can learn from their successful proposal submission from them, from your colleague, right? From the senior faculty in your department, right? So just don't be afraid to ask. I think usually they will share with you, and that's something that you should get as early as possible, right? So oh, that's how they write successful proposals and what kind of things that you can learn, right? So for teaching, as I said,
do this? Sorry, do you typically do this with just people in your department, or who do you ask? Who are you asking, kind of?
I think it's like, don't be afraid to ask, right? For example, you can ask me, right? Ask the people you know, right? Ask Stretch, right? Of course, Stretch didn't, right? But I mean, later maybe any people you met in the SE conference, if you think you have a good relationship with them, just ask, right? You can ask Darko, right? Of course, you ask Dr. Xie, right? This kind of thing. Just try to get as much help as you can, right? And then it's like downloading papers. It's free. And I think NSF actually has a rule. I recently know because our new department chair was NSF director. Is that every funded NSF proposals, if someone asking you to share their proposal, they should share with you. He told me. So don't be afraid to ask. Right? Of course, if the
Yeah, I just want to add one more point. It's like realistic expectation on like getting active help from your colleagues, right? Maybe when your colleagues recruited you to the department, they were so nice, right? And say, oh, like we'll help you, don't worry. But when you are getting there, right? It's not that they don't want to help you, because everyone is busy, right? There's so many things on their plate. They may not think about, oh, like every month or every week check with you, right? To see what to volunteer they help. No, right? I mean, I mean, sometimes it could happen for rare cases, but that doesn't mean they don't want to help you. It's just that everyone's so busy, right? And in addition, I think in general, people may have this mindset saying that, okay, you're in the independent PI, right? Principal investigator, you're independent now, even since day one. But of course, you should not hesitate to seek help, like what Xusheng said, from your so-called close circles, right? And all your close friends. So sometimes I think for Xusheng and Xiaoyin earlier, I criticized them because they did not share their career proposal with me, get my inputs or early enough, right? So because, I mean, I even don't need to read the whole thing. I just read the title, read one page. I could give you a lot of high-level feedback, right? And it wouldn't take too much of my time, but it's very critical. Sometimes the details may not matter much. It's just like how you position your work, right? And what are the keywords that you want to throw out to catch people's attention, to show the novelty. I think don't be afraid, especially you're in a kind of inner circle, right? Close collaborators or past collaborators. You should really be proactive. And don't be sad if like you sit in your office and no one drop by to check with you like for the first semester or first year. That's normal, right? And no matter how much your dear colleagues show their warm welcome to you before you join the department, right? So that was my experience when I started my career at NC State. Set the right expectation and be proactive.
Yeah. I think that's the right way to do that. Yeah. And for teaching, you have to ask the colleague in your department because they have the best experience. But also, you can ask people in a close cycle to share their slides to you or this kind of thing. So you can save you a lot of time. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think that's pretty much for the faculty advice. So maybe I'll just use 5 minutes to briefly talk about my research. And you guys are welcome to comment on my research and see whether we have collaboration opportunities. Okay. Okay. Let me see, where's my slide? Okay, I think I have to close this first. Right? Okay, it should be this one. Yeah. Can you see?
Yes, we can see your slide.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just be quick. Yeah. Okay. So now in Case Western, I'm setting up my lab called Rise Lab. Okay. So usually I work on research in software engineering and computer security. So these days I focus on 3 major directions. Okay. So software testing and analysis, system enterprise security, and the new direction is the blockchain system and the smart contracts, right? So of course, the technique developed by my group, including like text generation, program analysis, bug detections. And for security technique, we typically work on like system auditing, cybersecurity investigation. We also work on like AI, data mining, and anomaly detection, right? So pretty much cover all the hot topics these days. Yeah, there's also something that we kind of evolve our research. But I think the key insight of my research in terms of software analysis is that I usually don't just look at the code. I also look at the other software artifacts, including like GUIs, like semi-structured artifacts or unstructured artifacts like app description, they only have natural language descriptions. I think usually the code typically have the defined software behaviors, but these other software artifacts, they contain the semantics that to describe the expected behaviors or like convey some message to the users, right? For example, GUI conveying what's the app's behaviors to the users, right? An app description to describe the expected behavior this app should have. So combining these unstructured artifacts, semi-structured artifacts with the code, you can develop different kinds of, you can tackle more research problems, right? That's also something that I mentioned when I draw the picture back in UIUC. And this is how I developed the newly research projects in my group. So the first direction is talking about the more focus on mobile app, right? So typically these days I'm more focused on the intentions of the mobile apps behavior. So it's the reason why I focus on this is because like usually when you are working on software testing, the behavior is straightforward, right? If you pass the test, that's pass. You fail the test, it's failure. But for some of the undesired behavior in mobile apps, right? For example, if some apps steal your personal information, you can't use a test case to precisely describe it, right? Because normal app also send out your private information, but it doesn't mean this app is malicious or is something that can undesired behavior. So the more important thing is whether you can understand the intention of the app, and then later you analyze their behavior in the code, and then you check whether the behaviors match with the intention, right? It's very high level, and it's very difficult to implement back in the old days. But these days, with the deep learning, this is something that is doable, right? So this is actually the recent project I work on. Like the first one is like, if you look at the GUIs of the app, they typically have a lot of behaviors that may be related to security, right? That's the user can observe, right? So most of them are through the a text or the image that they convey this kind of message for you. For example, if you look at the first UI, you see that if I click this button, I expect the app to access my contact information, right? And if you look at the right image, the Google map, right? When you click certain kind of icon, you expect that you're using my location to center the map. So users are easy to understand this kind of information to convey by image or text, right? But it's very difficult for the code to understand, right? So my first project there is like, can I just analyze the GUI and then to automatically figure out, okay, this is a button that indicate a sensitive behavior. And if I indicate sensitive behavior, what kind of behavior it is, right? So I'm going to skip all of this, but this is the goal, right? What can I do? Automatic sensitive UI with identification by analyzing the images or the text, okay? So that was published back in 2019 AX paper. I'm going to skip all the opposite detail. Sorry, this way is faster. And the follow-up project there is actually the ultimate goal of this is like whether I can use, if I understand what the app described in the UI, can I just check the code and then I use the code to verify whether the code is doing something that they are telling in the UI, right? So that's the thing that I developed, published in CCS 2019. Is like, can I doing this kind of anomaly detection by checking whether your behavior actually match the expectation from the GUI, okay? So the way that I do it is, of course, I need to model both the UI and also the code. So and because deep learning is very good at modeling GUI, so we combine deep learning with program analysis to extract the behavior information, and then we'll be able to train the model to predict that, right? So the key thing here is like, you need to understand the UI, because UI mostly contains text and images and not code, right? So you need deep learning to model the GUI's information that's totally unstructured. And second is I use program analysis to model the program behavior, because in the code, okay, if I execute this line, it's still my information. So you will be able to use the code analysis to program analysis to link them. And finally, you do the discrepancy detection, basically doing anomaly detection, right? So when you're modeling the UI modeling the behavior, you can train on the popular normal app. So you know what's the usually for this kind of UI, you are expecting what kind of behavior. And then if I give you a similar UI and have different set of behavior, then you immediately know there's an anomaly, right? So we do this, and then we publish the paper in the CCS 2019. Okay, so that's the
I have a very quick
icons
question.
Sure.
Sorry, yeah. So regarding recognizing the icons, empirically, so I found that actually many many images, they have and some kind of textual information associated, like the resource ID or the content description. So like, did you find them to be helpful, or like?
Yes. In fact, it's like my research, I consider first, if you look at the images, when you model it, there's a pixel, right? And then we also model the correlated text, right? Is sometimes the text that is nearby the icon. And also through program analysis, you can analyze the UI, the XML file, then you can link those texts to these GUI widgets. That's also something that we use. We also use the resource ID. We also use the identifier name if we can find it, right? The ID. This got all together. They will be modeled by our model. In fact, we use this kind of thing called let me see this. Yeah, here. We actually use the co-attention mechanism that we combine the feature from the icon and the text together, and then we will be able to do a better prediction. Okay.
I see. Thanks.
Yeah, so that was in our CCS 2019 paper. You can read our paper for more details. I don't really have time to talk about that, right? But even you model it, that's not enough. You also need anomaly detection. So we also have this like group-based anomaly detection, right? There's also some idea that inspired by Mud Flow, which was published by Andrew Zeller back in old days, but this is very good, brilliant idea. Okay, so some of the works that I'm working right now, and we just submitted, submitted it, right? It's like we try to explain the sensitive behavior in mobile app, right? But how do we explain it, right? So I think I published a wiper paper. At that time, we tried to explain it by just use NLP technique to find out the sentences in the app description and use that sentence to explain it, right? But that's not enough, because we empirically find out that only around 30% of the behavior can be explained by the sentences in the app description. Most of the time, you wouldn't be able to find out the developer would like to provide the description for it. So how do we solve this problem, right? So our latest process is like we collect privacy policies from a lot of apps, popular apps. We also collect the text from their GUIs, and then we also analyze their core graph. And together, we train a sequence to sequences translation model, neural translation model. And then we will be able to automatically synthesize description for any of the private sensitive behavior you provided. So here is an example that we have. Sorry, this one, yeah. So you can see, right, from the UI, we grab the text from the button, right? Sometimes you have some useful information, and then we have the PACG is the permission protected API call graph, right? And from the call graph, we can grab the name of the method from the method name, and from the permission description from the privacy policy. Privacy policy usually has separate sections to talk about certain permissions, right? But sometimes it could be general, and some app may not have that part, right? But if we train on lots of apps, later, even your app do not have privacy permissions, I can still use NLP by analyzing your GUI and then to find out very similar app. And then I can use their privacy policies to generate descriptions for your API. So this is very different from the traditional sequence to sequence translation. Usually they use that to do code command generation, right? But for code command generation, you usually get those vocabulary from their identifier name and the method name. You are describing exactly what these several lines of code are doing. But we are doing different things, right? We are from the user's perspective, we're describing why they are using a sensitive why they have this kind of sensitive behavior. So that the vocabulary coming from the privacy policies, coming from the GUI, and then coming from your code. We combine three together and then we generate sentences. So we call this approach called a describe context. Essentially, we're trying to automatically synthesize the natural language description for the context of using certain sensitive behaviors. And these are some of the examples that we grab that we can do. So as we can see, we can actually generate non-trivial descriptions. So at the beginning, when we try to use like keyword approaches, typically we can only generate a very fixed template of descriptions. Like for example, like you can use my location to find out where you are. This kind of a very simple sentence. But with the privacy policies and the GUIs, we can actually generate a very user understandable description. As you can see, we can sometimes generate. You can say, okay, we use your camera to scan QR code, right? Normally, camera is just for taking photos, right? But scan QR code, you must learn from some privacy policy, okay? And for storage, we can learn like, okay, you can save image to your phone, right? And you even share. So you can look at some of our example here. We also conduct an empirical study by recruiting some students to rate the sentences that we generated with the reference sentences provided by the developer in the app descriptions, right? We can see that for some cases, we achieve very good ratings. Of course, we have some cases that we do not achieve a very good rating. That's because of the limited samples that you can get for certain permissions. Okay, so this is also one of the new directions that we are doing right now. So I'm also working on system security. I'm not sure whether you guys are interested in system security or not. But for system security, typically I work at system monitoring. Basically, we are trying to monitoring every system call that you are issuing in the operating systems. And we leverage this to review the attack steps that you perform. For example, you come into my computer, copy my file. All these things are recorded in the system call, and we will be able to query it. So we publish a paper in Unix ATC by building a domain-specific language to query all those system call, and then to understand whether certain behaviors happen in your systems. And with our language is very good at specifying attack behavior, for example, like copying file and sending a file to other machine, or like you or in a short period, you access certain IP address for many times. Okay. We also published another Unix security paper by porting this language to a real-time stream monitoring. Right. So for historical data, we have a language like Circle to query historical data. We also have another domain-specific language to do real-time anomaly detection. We provide a language that allow you to write anomaly detection model to do it. We also have several other papers that in terms of how to compressing this data to be easier for query and for storing this data into your database. And the recent work. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so previously, so like for SQL here, so what are you detecting? So it's like abnormal SQL queries or something?
No. Actually, it's like, for example, if you look at some CVE report, and the CVE report tell you, if you see this virus get into a system, it may create a Windows registry entry like this, and then later you may download certain file. Then you can actually write a query to describe this behavior. And then we are going to search the log to see whether this behavior happened in certain computer or not. And if it happens, what did it happen? Yeah.
So this query is written by users, like want to use your system to detect such behavior?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So along this line, we are recently have another ICDE paper that we allow user that we search natural language. You write natural language, and then we use NLP to convert to our domain-specific language, and then we can automatically search.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting. I would like, we can maybe contact offline on this. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, you can send me email. We can talk about.
Yeah, thank you.
But you can watch out for my latest paper. We probably will have an ICD 2021 paper along this line as well.
Okay, thank you.
Natural language, NLP text to transfer to query. Yeah. Also, another direction that we are working on right now is like, instead of the query that you human load, we can automatically perform the search for the attack behaviors, and we're doing automatic filtering. Now, this paper is under submission. We got major revision, so we have to do more experiments. So essentially, is like, if you know a certain event is suspicious, for example, you say, okay, this file, I haven't seen it before. It was created by some unknown process. Maybe it's an attack, I don't know. But we can perform a causal analysis to check backward in time to find out all these events, all these system code, how they are related to each other. Okay, and then, but this usually will be very big graph. So we are developing a technique to automatically filter out irrelevant dependencies and only keep the dependencies that are more likely to reveal attack steps. So that's one direction I'm working on right now. My latest NSF proposal is also based on this line of research. And based on this, we also propose a new language called dependence graph query language. So yeah, you can see one of my recent research focus was developing domain-specific language. I really like that kind of feeling, like writing a new language. Yeah. So this is also this language is different. This is a graph query language. These days, graph query language you only see from like Cypher, from Neo4j, but it's very limited. It lack of a lot of expressiveness in terms of describing weight computation, value propagation, or also recursive graph search, which are required to really describe sometimes an attack, how it happens, and how different steps are related to each other. So we are also working on this direction right now. That's the second direction on my system security. And my third direction is about blockchain, right? I presented in Peking University, I think last year. It's about how do we enable different heterogeneous blockchain to talk to each other. So you have one program in one blockchain, and then you want to invoke a method of another programs in another blockchain. We divide a protocol, and then we provide a language called hyperservice languages. The language will automatically, it will be compiled into executable protocols we call like TDG here. So it will be executed in different blockchain, and then the whole process will be recorded by another blockchain. So it will make sure the interoperability of the blockchain can be achieved. So this is also one direction we're working on right now. And then we another latest work on this one is we're also doing program analysis on smart contract, because smart contract was written by Solidity, right? It's also an object-oriented language. It has many interesting things. So one of the projects that right now I'm working on is how to automatically repair or patch generation for those smart contracts that have vulnerabilities. Yeah, and we also try to do another more crazy idea is how to automatically translate a contract that you written in English and automate it into smart contract, like in Solidity. We are also working on this direction as well. I just studied it. I think the idea is flashing challenges, but it's interesting. Yeah. So that's roughly the three major directions that are currently in my group. Yeah. So we don't have time, but if you want to discuss a little bit, we can discuss. Yeah.
Yes, maybe we can see whether or not any students have any kind of final questions they want to ask Xusheng before we conclude the meeting today.
Yeah, yeah. Any question is fine. Yeah, or we can talk offline.
Hi, Xusheng.
Yeah.
I'm an undergraduate student from Peking University, and I'm taking my internship in Taobao. My work is to some extent similar to your works about the deep intent, because I want to do the automated testing from the visual perspective. So I need to understand the thematics of each visual pictures. And
Okay.
I'm interested in, I have read some of your papers, and I think I can get benefit from your works, because even though I don't need to detect the malicious behaviors, I need to detect their intents. Like if I click a cart, since I'm testing Taobao, I will raise a shopping behavior. For example, if I click the add to cart text, I will add the good to the list of my shop carts. Then I may pay the bill. If I can directly analyze the intent of each icons, I can improve the efficiency of my testing tools.
That's
Is
great.
my
That's your research project, right? Yeah, your internship project,
Yeah.
right? I think that, that's actually great. So essentially, to understand the intention of the button, you have two directions you can go, right? First direction is maybe adopt my UIUC 2019 papers, right? You're using computer vision technique. Computer vision technique essentially have two types. One is the OCR, right? You directly translate the picture into text, right? Another one is like, as I classify here, we call it object icon, right? So you actually, the way you can do is that you can collect a database of the icons that you are interested in, and you manually give them some semantics. For example, you say, okay, these are the item for add, these are the item for delete, or these are the item. For example, if you're only testing shopping website, right? Then you can collect all the commonly used icons, because like usually when people are using shopping web pages, they are expecting like if I switch from Amazon to Taobao, right? The UI should look similar, right? Otherwise, I don't understand what the icon means, right? So then essentially,
that's why we use the visual perspective to develop our testing tool for the generality, because we can test.
Yeah, I think that's actually my idea is general to your approaches. Essentially, it's like I would suggest you can conduct an empirical study. For example, you can visit all the popular online shopping websites, and you download all their icons, and then you manually classify them into several groups, right? And then you can use computer vision, use those icons as your knowledge base, right? And then later you can develop an CV algorithm. If you see an icon that is similar to any of them, of course, you can check my paper for more details. Then you will be understand, okay, this icon means add to cart, and this icon means checkout, right? Of course, the testing in the shopping website, the sequences is usually, you can define several key semantics you want, and then you collect icons that you like. For example, for my paper, I only care about a sensitive in permission group, right? So I collect icon for the A group. Another way for you to do that is like go to Baidu, do image search, and then you type in cart, right? For example, shopping cart, right?
Interesting.
You type shopping cart, and then you only say in English you call clip art, and then maybe in Chinese you can find like some tubiao, this kind of thing, right? And then they will give you a list of most popular icons that represent that semantics. You can also collect them into your knowledge base as well. That's actually how I did in my paper. Yeah, we use Google search, Google image search. If I type, yeah, that is another way.
I will try.
Yeah, this is a more definitive way. The generalization of this approach is not that good, because if you only work for shopping website, you wouldn't be able to use that knowledge for for other website, right? So another way is like you collect as many websites as you can, and then you do a deep learning approach, right? But that will require you have a very large data set. So if you look at my CCS 2019 paper, we actually need about several thousand apps for us to learn the semantics of the icons. So the scale is very different, right? When you collect the icon for the shopping website, you probably need to look at 10, then you have a good idea, right? But if you want the machine learning to automatically learn them all, probably you need a lot more samples.
Thanks for your advice. I will try to do it, and hope we can discuss privately later if I have made some progress.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if the process, if I can collaborate with the process, I'm happy to. Yeah.
Thanks. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Okay, maybe not. Yes, so maybe we can thank you again, Xusheng, for presenting today.
Yeah, my
I
pleasure.
don't know if Tao wants to say anything.
Yeah, I think like for follow up, we for specific students who think their research has quite some overlapping and potential collaboration opportunities with Xusheng's group, we can separately arrange some subgroups like a meeting to follow up, right? And like Win also records the meeting. As I told Win, the distribution or sharing of the video should be strictly limited to only us. I mean, the current members of the group. If like going beyond the scope, we need to get explicit approval from Xusheng. Okay, so please respect that. Later, when Win share the video, because I have another important meeting in the first about 30 minutes of Xusheng's talk. I mean, I myself would like to catch up on the parts that I missed. So with that, I think it's I personally think the sharing, the discussion have been quite inspiring and helpful, even for myself, because it's always good to get different perspective, right, from different people. Even, I mean, I closely work with Xusheng for quite some years. It's also good to get perspective and to reflect how, I mean, I could do better in terms of my understanding, right? I mean, doing research or advising students to do research. So I hope other students could also, I mean, not could, or also have similar feeling about getting most out of Xusheng's talk. In the past, we also had a way doing a similar style of talk. I think that kind of style or that kind of talk would be very helpful. We may arrange more, but of course we don't have a whole lot of alumni or learners like to occupy us slots. But I think we should get almost all of them, including Shirash, right, and or Mithun, right, and who are doing work in industry, right, and Shiraj worked with Win on summer internships and also with other students, former students in the past. So I think we could get different perspectives, and I think this time I mean, I see like Wei is here in the meeting. That was good. I think we should at least invite like former students who are in academia, right? For example, Xue Qin and back for these kind of sections. So they could also, because the shared information would be helpful for them, right? To carry out their research, to advise students. I mean, like that's also, I mean, very important. I mean, for junior faculty members. Okay, so I will stop here, and thanks a lot, and let's keep in touch and stay safe and take care. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Right. Bye-bye. Bye.
Sounds good.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.